I just read a piece from the op-ed that you wrote with Ben Bernanke.
Yes.
And then I followed up by saying that we had talked to Scott Bessent, and we'd asked a similar question of actually Elizabeth Warren recently, which is, if in fact Jay Powell were to be fired, ousted, or otherwise pushed out, what would the market's reaction actually be?
Well, I think we got a taste of that when President Trump announced that he had shown a letter to Republicans that would call for Chair Powell's ouster. And while the market reaction was brief, what we saw was the exchange value of the dollar declined, longer-term interest rates moved up, and the stock market declined. Now, President Trump quickly said he had no plan to fire Chair Powell, but I think that gives you directionally a sense of what would happen. Look, importantly, markets rely on the independence of the Fed and the Fed's commitment to achieving its congressionally mandated goals of price stability and maximum employment in assessing the soundness of the U.S. economy and their security in terms of returns they can expect investing in the United States. And when a president threatens to remove a chair unless he radically lowers interest rates with the stated purpose of helping the government finance its borrowing, not the congressionally mandated goal of price stability, but to ease financing costs on the outstanding federal debt. This is really disconcerting to markets, and what we've seen throughout history, both U.S. history and history around the world, is when that kind of pressure drives monetary policy in a country, high inflation is the inevitable consequence. And we've seen that in the United States as well. That happened during World War II. Ultimately, in the 40s, we saw double-digit inflation in the United States. And the Fed really rebelled, and there was an agreement in 1951 that the Fed should not have any obligation to help the Treasury finance its debt payments, but rather to focus on price stability and full employment.
Janet, let me ask you this. There is a perception that the Fed has been wholly independent, that historically presidents have not made the kind of comments that this president has, and that this is all new. The truth is that to some degree, this is not new. You can go back 1965. You know the story. LBJ physically shoved Fed Chair William Martin against a wall at his Texas ranch as he was demanding that he lower interest rates. And I wonder, when you start to think about that story, or you start to think about the story that Paul Volcker used to tell about when he was brought into the Oval Office with Ronald Reagan, how we should think about the very concept of the Fed as an independent entity.
Well, you're absolutely right. There have been episodes in the past that we know about now where presidents have attempted to pressure Fed chairs. We've seen what happens when that occurs, and probably the most prominent example would be Richard Nixon exhorting Arthur Burns to hold interest rates down before the 1972 election. And what that ushered in the United States was a period of stagflation, weak growth, high unemployment, high inflation, and it really took Paul Volcker to come in, and it cost us a very deep recession to re-anchor inflationary expectations to get them down. So this kind of pressure, which has sometimes existed, but certainly not, in my experience, not during the Clinton administration or any subsequent administration that I'm aware of, we see that the consequences are very poor for the economy. We end up with higher inflation, worse economic performance, and it undermines the global role of the dollar and the willingness of foreigners to invest in the United States.
Secretary Yellen, on that point, there is a lot of concern about President Trump inserting someone from his administration directly into the Fed. There's this idea that the Fed is supposed to be apolitical, but I wonder if you think that that was broken down to some extent when you went directly from chairwoman of the Fed to the Treasury Secretary, going directly into an administration, Lael Brainerd doing a similar move with that. I just wonder if you think that that door between the administration and the Fed should be closed a little more tightly, more of a Chinese wall to prevent any sort of perception of a lack of independence at the Fed.
So it has not been uncommon. Many Fed chairs have had past experience in the White House in an administration. This was true of Greenspan as well. And I suppose it's natural because presidents come to know people who serve in their administrations and gain confidence in their judgment. What's really important, though, is when an individual is wearing the hat of Fed chair, that they have the capacity and willingness to make fact-based judgments and to pursue the goals that are congressionally mandated, namely price stability and maximum employment. That becomes their job, and they have, I believe, whether it was myself or Bernanke or Greenspan, I think all of us were able to establish a track record for independence, staying out of politics, not succumbing in any way to short-term political pressures, behaving in a nonpartisan way. And the track record, by and large, although all of us are human and may have made some mistakes, I think the Fed's track record over many decades has been one that's been successful. We've had low and basically stable inflation. The post-pandemic experience was an exception, but look where we are in the economy now. Inflation is coming down, and it's close to the Fed's 2% goal. The labor market remains strong with 4.1% unemployment, and really the United States was like every developed country that experienced a surge in price pressures during and after the pandemic.
I guess I would ask if the key is just making sure that you're apolitical when you're in the job, that you're not too exposed to any pressure that comes from the administration. Do you have any concerns about the top candidates who have been mentioned as the potential next Fed chairman? I guess that would include Kevin Hassett, Kevin Warsh, Scott Bessent. Those have been some of the top names, along with Waller.
So I'm not going to comment on individual candidates for this job. What is very important is that the president choose a person who strongly believes and will defend the Fed's independence and keep it divorced from short-term political pressure. And it concerns me when I hear President Trump say a qualification for the job is that the person must have the views that interest rates need to be cut radically. I believe the person needs to carefully look at the data, consider economic trends, work with the other members of the Federal Open Market Committee, and make fact-based judgments that reflect a commitment to achieve the congressionally mandated goals. And keeping financing costs low for the federal debt is not one of the goals, and it would be very dangerous to pursue that, as I said. But that is a sure road to high inflation.
Secretary, though, to the extent that, and we just had Kevin Warsh on the broadcast last week, We've had Kevin Hassett on the broadcast. Obviously, we've had Scott Bessent on the broadcast recently, all three of whom have praised the president, have praised the president's economic policies, have called effectively for lower interest rates themselves. Is that something historically that other potential nominees for this role have done?
Well, I honestly can't recall past selections of Fed chairs in which candidates have come out and actually expressed their opinions about the direction of future monetary policy. I think most candidates in the past have indicated, as I said, a commitment to fact-based analysis, making judgments depending on how the economy performs and in light of achieving the mandated goals.
I wanted to ask you just a separate question, and maybe it's a personal one, about the collegiality of the Fed and former Fed heads and also former Treasury secretaries. At least historically, and maybe I'm wrong here, most maybe talked in private about these issues with each other. I know there are dinners and things that have been set up over the years between former heads of the Fed and former heads of Treasury. But I don't know if it's all spilled out in public in such a way where former heads of these units are then writing op-eds critically in the press out there about their successors. And I haven't even, and I don't think I've seen those in the role then criticizing back, which is to say you probably saw that the current Treasury Secretary made some comments about you and your China policy and made what I think was he was attempting to make a joke about mushrooms and beer. But I'm curious just how you think about that.
So, as you said, there is a tradition in which former Treasury secretaries and Fed chairs get together with an incoming Treasury secretary to provide the benefit of their advice and insights from their own experience. And there is a kind of camaraderie that has developed among former Treasury secretaries and Fed chairs, all of whom are given the profoundly important job of stewarding the American economy in a way that is successful. And personally, my hope would be that Secretary Bessent will be very successful in his role as Treasury Secretary. All of us know how difficult the job can be and how challenging it is. As soon as Secretary Bessent was nominated, I called him and offered to provide any advice that would be useful, and that offer still stands. So I would like to see him be successful. We do, however, have significant policy differences, and he hasn't reached out to me to seek my advice, but I stand ready to give it.
Let me ask you a separate question, which is, he had proposed before President Trump was elected this idea of a shadow Fed chair. That was actually something that he developed and then made public, this idea. There's an argument already being made to some degree that there is a shadow Fed chair. We may not know who that name is in practice, but that by default, come next May, there will be a different person in that role. And the likelihood is it's one of the names we might have discussed, and that those individuals have made a pledge to some degree, publicly or privately, or will have to, that they will lower interest rates, and that the market is already expecting that and therefore planning for it and seeing through whatever happens between now and then. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think that that's a very dangerous idea, and I hope you're wrong that the market is assuming that a person will not be independent and will cave to political pressure. I think this is one of the dangers of what President Trump is doing, insisting that he will only put in place a Fed chair who believes in lowering interest rates. And as we noted earlier, you can see what the market reaction is going to be to that. Secretary Bessent even yesterday expressed his belief that monetary policy should be independent. And I think most market participants continue to expect that the next Fed chair will act independently. But this idea of creating a shadow Fed chair immediately casts a shadow over whoever it is that gets the assignment next May of becoming Fed chair, that it impairs their credibility with the markets and creates a problem for them right from the outset, where people will expect that they're political.
Secretary Yellen, you mentioned that you think inflation's coming down and kind of under control. What do you think about the economy more broadly, how things are going?
Well, I think the economy has been remarkably resilient and is in basically a good place. But I do have concerns going forward. The tariff policy, we still don't really know what it's going to be. So there remains a lot of uncertainty around what the level of tariffs will be going forward, what the response of other countries will be. We are seeing some limited pressure on prices of goods that are most exposed to the tariffs, things like apparel, toys, and the like, household appliances. I expect, because it's still in a way early days, that we're going to see further pressure and more significant pressure on inflation as a result of the tariffs over the remainder of the summer and into the fall, although we need to wait and see. And we're beginning to see some softness in the labor market, although the unemployment rate remains low. Average job creation over the last 3 months has been running at around 150,000 jobs per month, which is fine. But hiring rates are low. Quit rates are low that suggest some softness developing in the labor market. And as the tariffs begin to take effect, household incomes are going to decline. And that can really reduce spending significantly. I think that the uncertainty about tariffs is weighing on capital investment spending as well. And so we could see stagflationary kinds of outcomes in the months ahead of weaker employment and rising inflation. And I think that's what we need to keep an eye on.
A couple other quick questions for you. One is Mohamed Al-Arian calling for, I don't know if he's calling for it, Becky.
Well, he's suggesting that Jay Powell should step down in order to protect the Fed's independence. His quote is, if your objective is to protect the independence of the central bank, then it's better that he step down than to stay on and have the attacks multiply. What do you think of that?
Well, I disagree with that strongly. I think Chair Powell is completely committed to the Fed's independence. I don't believe that the president actually has the ability to fire Chair Powell, except as the law specifies for cause. And I think that he should fill out his term and stay on until his term expires.
What do you think for cause means, by the way?
Some gross mismanagement of monetary policy or the Fed or some corruption, a serious breach of his responsibilities as Fed chair, which I don't believe there is any such basis.
Let me ask you two other quick questions. We've talked for many years, Secretary, about crypto. I think you have been a critic or at least a skeptic, and we have watched crypto just explode. Obviously, the Genius Act just passing last week. What do you think now?
Well, I have concerns about some of the legislation that was passed. I convened, I believe it was in 2022, the president's working group on financial markets to make recommendations about the appropriate regulation of stable coins. And I'm pleased to see that Congress did take up that topic and that a framework has been put in place. But unfortunately, I think it contains significant weaknesses. And so it's not all that I would have wanted to see. And that does give me concerns about what the role of stable coins, for example, will be going forward, whether or not there are adequate controls in place. And I believe they present financial stability risks that should be addressed.
Secretary, we got to run. Before we go, we had Secretary Bessent on recently. He was making a comment about having breakfast, as you know, with his counterpart at the Fed in Jay Powell, and said that the Fed's food is better. So I figured I'd ask you, since you're probably the only person who's ever had the job at the Treasury and the Fed, who's got the better food?
Well, my counterparts seem to have enjoyed coming over to Treasury, and I certainly enjoyed going over to the Fed. So I frankly think at this point it's a toss-up, and both have pretty good.
Oh, come
food.
on, give it. You got to pick one.
Well, I like Treasury very much, but I think the Fed's food is absolutely fine as well.